Hello, this is Daniel Patrick Brennan. This is the Wine is Food podcast, and I am sitting with Macario Montoya in California after a little bit of a hustle and bustle and wait to try to make this happen. I'm here with Macario. Say hello to the podcast people, Macario.
Hello, podcast world.
I'm getting to realize this is kind of the way it is, but, I think you were kind of bummed a couple times we had to cancel this and that, and I'm like, no big deal. I've had to wait months and months for certain things, and I think with the industry we're in and the fact that you got a growing family now and everything like that, I think the important thing is that you just keep trying, and we try to sit down and talk about like what this is, a little behind the scenes look at winemaking and everybody's, more importantly, the stories behind the winemaking. And I really wanted you to be my first California interview because you were very instrumental in my introduction to Napa, Sonoma, and working with you last year was at Pina Cellars was great. And so I thought it would be a nice sort of transition into a California winemaking podcast to speak with you first. And so,
well, I'm happy to be here.
Cool. We're in the Decibel Wine studio here, the West Coast U.S. studios.
Lovely view.
And we're extremely lucky because there was two seriously annoying chirping dogs out my window for like most of the afternoon, and I was so happy they finally settled down. And now we're taking it easy up here with a bottle of Campesino Los Carneros Pinot Noir, which is lovely, man. Tasting good. And
first Pinot made.
Is this the 09?
This is 08.
08. Wow.
Going old school.
Busted out the good stuff for me.
Of course.
I appreciate it.
Nothing but the best for you.
Make sure you're up on that too. I think you're good, but I don't. I think this room is we're pretty soundproof.
Basically, you're saying make love to the mic.
Yeah, get up in there. I know you're not afraid to mix it up and start sweating. So the theme of these so far, the first sort of set of podcasts that I've been doing, seems to be, how you got into this. What is your story? And much like yourself, or much like myself, you had another career before this, and then it just sort of drew you into it. Not surprising growing up in this area, but how did you get into it? First you were doing other work, and
I basically grew up in the area about 45 minutes from Napa, and so I was around wine. My parents enjoyed drinking wine. Anytime friends or family would come visit them, it was let's hop in the car and head over to Napa and do some tasting. And as a young kid, growing up in the early 80s, there was no technology. The technology was talking with your brother, and that got quite annoying after a while when you'd get dragged on these wine tasting trips. So I kind of had this negative connotation of what wine was. I remember my parents offering it to me as a younger kid and just never really liking it. And so it wasn't until I went away to college that I kind of discovered wine in a box. And I remember calling home to my dad and saying, "Oh, Dad, I found this great wine. I really enjoy it." And he said, "Oh, mijo, what is it?" And I said, "Oh, it's Franzia." And I just hear this loud groan on the other end. But I can laugh about that now and think about that now as really kind of a turning point in my life, in the sense that that was my introduction to wine.
Sure.
And whether it was, crap wine, bad wine, sweet wine, artificial wine, it was still wine. And it really kind of piqued my interest. And then it was not necessarily the kids I went to college with, but their parents. In trying to explain where I grew up, I'd say, I grew up in Vacaville, and it was this blank look, and between Sacramento and San Francisco, and that turned into, no, near Napa. And I would say, yeah. And they would, what I wouldn't do to be there. And I just was kind of always like, all right, sure, whatever. Never really thinking it. I think everybody kind of, when you live in an area where something's prominent, you never really think about it until you're drawn away to it, and then you come back. So I graduated from the University of Notre Dame in marketing, finance, and got a job working for Bank of America right out of college in San Francisco. Moved back to San Francisco. Didn't know very many people, and happened to be in a wine or a coffee shop, and saw a little flyer for a wine sensory evaluation class that the local city college was offering. And I thought, hey, this will give me something to do. I'll maybe learn something about wine. My most important motive was I thought I'd find a girl or find some girls in the class that I could hang out with, and so I took the class, and little did I know that I would just be struck over the head by a wine by wine, and I really started to pick up on the nuances and differences between wines from different regions, wine from different area. Pinot grown in Santa Barbara was going to be completely different than a Pinot grown in Oregon. And so that was my real kind of first, maybe one day I'll get into the wine industry and it'll be something that I want to do. It was more of, hey, I'm going to make millions and then buy my own winery. That clearly didn't happen. And right about that time, I met another guy that was in the class, and we started taking day trips up to Napa and Sonoma, down to the Monterey and Carmel area, and really, really again trying to just kind of anytime I could get into wine. And then I got to the point, I think that a lot of people who are in their early 20s, mid 20s get to where they kind of try and find themselves, as opposed to, life has been up until you're 24 or 25 in so many, 4 or 5 year steps. And, you do well in high school to get into a good college. You do well in college to get into a good job. You get that good job, and then it's like you get 4 or 5 years into it, and it's like, I don't want to do this. This isn't it. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I had saved up some money and decided to take a couple months off. I also, around that same time, had started dating a girl who would become my wife down the road, and her family had a small vineyard and winery down in the Carneros area called Ceja. And I started doing some work with them, mainly selling wine to restaurants and wine shops in the city. And then that sort of morphed into, well, hey, we're opening a tasting room. Why don't you come help us out in the tasting room when you can? So this was just all sort of a natural kind of progression to, drinking Franzia, to learning about the differences in regions, to actually working in a winery. And I still was not sort of awestruck by anything, and had decided to do a harvest internship at a winery in Sonoma called Macarios. And that was my true hook. That was the production side. That's what I wanted to do. Seeing grapes come in, and then a few months later being pressed and put into barrel or tank and becoming wine. That was, to me, really kind of what stood out. And I said, this is what I want to do. I don't want to look back. And so, long-winded answer to wine. How I got into it was, boxed wine to production.
And during that stage, were there certain varietal, certain style wine that was like, can you pinpoint anything sort of early on that you said, man, I probably think, before you got into production, I'm talking about that you said,
I think it was Pinot.
Yeah.
Pinot Noir was really kind of, and I still, vividly remember that being one of the first classes of this sensory evaluation was, the first hour the professor would lecture about wine and everything that, encompassed wine growing, wine making. And then the last hour was tasting wine, and we would sit there, usually 6 to 7 glasses in front of us. You would talk, it was, each one was a theme or a region or something, and Pinot was one of the first ones that we did. And I just found the different flavors and different nuances to each glass just intoxicating. Yeah. And we could just walked away with it, just trying to figure out how a grape grown in so many different regions could taste so differently. And then, a subsequent class, finding out that a grape grown on the same vineyard made by 6 different people can also taste so different. And so I would definitely say Pinot was really kind of that first.
You're still trying to figure out everything about Pinot.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
It's definitely a tricky grape. It's definitely a difficult grape to grow and to make. And then I think my second sort of aha moment when it came to wine before getting into production was a visit with Griselda, my wife, when we were dating for about 6 months. We took a trip to the south of France, and we went to Châteauneuf-du-Pape and the whole Côtes du Rhône and the whole Rhône region. And I was just enamored and blown away by everything that I tasted there. I couldn't get enough.
Fair enough.
And so yeah, I mean, and those tend to be the two varietals that for Campesino that I focus on. I think that I'm more of a Rhone producer, doing Syrah, now coming up on some Grenache and Mourvedre, and then this coming harvest doing my first white. I'll be doing a Roussanne Viognier blend. So that's kind of the direction. That's kind of my sort of upbringing was that, and then Pinot is really like your first love, your first kiss. You'll never forget it.
Yeah.
And so I'll always kind of pay homage to what it drew me into wine, and we'll always make a bit of Pinot.
So was 08, we were just talking about drinking year 08. That was the first year you just made Pinot that year?
I made Pinot and Syrah.
And Syrah that year.
I made Pinot and Syrah in 2008.
What does Campesino mean?
Campesino means farm worker in Spanish, and it was a name that was sort of near and dear to both my wife and I. We both really wanted to have our own label. Me working in the wine industry, and then my wife growing up in the wine community and industry, and seeing her parents come from Mexico, starting off as day laborers and vineyard workers, and then sort of making their sort of life by owning some vineyards, and then her brothers ultimately spinning that into a winery. So with the name Campesino, it means farm worker, and we wanted to sort of really kind of pay homage to, I think, a forgotten aspect of the wine industry.
Well, I think again, one of the I alluded to the experience I had working with you last year, and a big part of that, and I'm kind of pulling back the curtain here a little bit, was the experience I had with a lot of the Sehas and just that whole giant family, which is just so rich in culture, and there's so many different things going on. I think there's 10 children.
10 children total.
Children, and then the oldest, the father, mother, just you just see it in their hands, in their face, and just great people. And I really, really enjoyed that part of working Harvest last year, was sneaking out to this vineyard and that one, and working with those people and meeting them all. And you could just tell by the obviously it's a Mexican family, so there's a tie in there with some of the vineyard workers and everything, but you could just tell, we went and did that pick with those guys on one of the days, and I've seen other people that work for them, that there's a respect and a joy that they, different than I've seen with working with other vineyards and other vineyard workers,
right,
here and in New Zealand, and there's, I think, maybe a little extra level. Maybe it's the fact that her dad just offers you a beer every time you see him.
That definitely helps.
I think that helps too. It takes a lot of beer to make good wine.
That
is
what
they
true.
say. So you're also doing another little project right now. It's public knowledge, or should we?
It's still under the curtain hasn't been fully pulled on that one.
Okay, well, we'll that leaves time to speak for with another.
That's round 2.
That's we'll
the sequel.
The sequel that gives us something to come back to, which is cool because we can.
But I am also the assistant winemaker at Pina Cellars, where you interned last year,
and so a completely different production there. They do some big cabs and a bit of Chardonnay, and well, how did you end up at Pina?
I ended up at Pina in a strange kind of way. After that internship that I had with Macarios, they kept me on for a few months after harvest to help them out with some other projects and bottling and whatnot. And that took me into sort of the January time frame. And I had been still on the weekends helping out at Seha, because when you get into the production side, especially the beginning of production, when you're, as our good dear friend Claire Palmer likes to say, a cellar rat.
A cellar rat, yes.
You don't make very much money.
No.
And so I was still helping out Seha on the weekends at the tasting room, and a gentleman and his wife came in one day on the weekend, and he was the sales manager at Pina, and had indicated, hey, anytime you're up and about the valley tasting, please stop by. I'd love to welcome you, love to host you. So I'm one who loves to take people up on those offers. because the more experiences you get trying different wines and enjoying different wines, I think the better of a wine drinker and a winemaker you can become. And so the very following weekend, had some friends up from San Francisco who were coming up to watch the Super Bowl. And we said, all right, well, hey, the Super Bowl's not starting until 3. Why don't you guys come up a little early? We'll go wine tasting. And so we went by Pina and met a young guy that was working there by the name of Jared Pierce. And it just so happened that Jared was leaving the following day for South Africa. And I said, oh, that's awesome. And I was kind of, my internship, my time at Macarios was winding down. And I was really starting to look for a place to call home and make something full-time. So the very next day, called Chuck up and said, hey, Chuck, I came by the winery. I loved the wines. I thought it was great. I loved just the whole mystique of the place. And I hear that your guys' assistant is leaving, and I'd love to throw my hat in the ring. And he said, well, can you sell wine? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, can you make wine? And I said, yeah. And because Pina at that time was pretty tiny in their production. They had a sales manager and a winemaker and then one person that was going to support them. So when you weren't selling wine to customers, you were doing wine work. And when you weren't doing wine work, you were selling wine to customers. Mm-hmm. And so I interviewed, came in, met with the Pina brothers and the winemaker and Chuck. And a few hours after that, got offered the job and started there. And lo and behold, a couple months later, they were in rapid expansion mode and brought on a whole new winemaker and restructured things in such a way that they were at the size now that the winemaker needed a full-time person working there for her. And so it was really, a lot of luck and just being in the right place at the right time. And so timing. It was all good timing.
And I think Pina's, was a great place to start out with for me last year, but also just a good place to go visit for people, because the one thing I think is really cool about it is they have a large vineyard management side and vineyards that they're kind of working with all over the valley. And I'm assuming, do they do any over in Sonoma too?
They don't manage any vineyards in Sonoma, but they do a lot of the replanting.
Yeah. So you get to see a wide range of things. You sort of get, I wouldn't say they're a big company, but you get maybe some of the benefits of working for a medium-sized company. Right. While in the winery, it's a very tiny, focused production. And then obviously you get to make your wines there, which is super cool. But it still has that, tiny feel. I mean, people come in for tasting, and it's literally a table that rolls around the barrel work.
Depending on where everything is, or what time of the year, whether it's bottling, harvest. So it's got to be on wheels.
Yeah. And I think that it's really cool for people to come in and get that experience. But then at the same, I know from working for a couple small people that it was really good to have the PVM lunchroom down the road and just a little bit bigger support, I think, behind just a small brand.
Definitely. I mean, and the wealth of knowledge that the vineyard management company had. I mean, that's part of the enticement of going over there for lunch is, there's a lunchroom and there's, the owners all the way down to the vineyard foreman are, sitting around the table, and you just become a sponge and you just listen to everything that's being talked about and going on.
That last year was, hey, where's this place at? What are they, what kind of spray are they using in that place? And it was a great introduction to me. But getting back to Campesino, one of the things I was thinking of today, because I actually had a day off today, so I drove out to Santa Rosa and saw Moonrise Kingdom, the new Wes Anderson film, which was really cool. But on my way out there, I was actually passing on a couple roads that I was like, I used to drive out this way with Macario. We went by that tin shed bar that's on the corner.
Yes.
What's that called again? That's like somebody's tin shed,
right outside
Ernie's
of Petaluma.
tin shed or something like that outside of Petaluma.
It's a half tire shop, half.
I mean, it's a bar right on a highway.
Dollar beers.
It's like you can see the bar stools as you turn the corner in the door. And I think that's sort of an interesting dynamic always here in the Valley and in Sonoma is on the one hand, you have these $1 million, $1 billion wineries and, gaudy giant tasting rooms and everything, all the way down to like tin sheds serving beers like on the side of the road.
And ponchas.
And yeah, that's a perfect example. Is like Yountville right across the street. You have, high-end tasting rooms and little quaint shops and, all these rich people that are coming in and staying in their hotels there and bed and breakfast. And then they have, ponchas with a taco truck and plastic cups of beer on draft and cheap shots of tequila and everything. But driving out that way, I was trying to remember. So where your Syrah comes from, right? Wasn't that kind of on the way when we drove out there?
So where you hit that tin shack, I believe you probably made a right to head over to the Santa Rosa area, and if you had made a left, you would have continued on the road and hit their Serra Vineyard. The Serra Vineyard comes from. It's technically the Sonoma Coast, but as those that are in the wine industry know, the Sonoma Coast happens to be one of the largest AVAs in California.
It's nuts.
And this particular vineyard is probably a good 65 miles from the true coast. However, it is probably colder at times than the actual coast. If you think of the California coastline, there are a number of gaps within that mountain range that basically borders, from if you go from the Oregon border all the way down to San Diego, all of the Pacific Ocean is basically, blocked by a range of hills and mountains. And within California, you have a series of pockets of openings, the largest being the Golden Gate Bridge. And then about 60 miles north, you have another gap called the Petaluma Gap. And basically that is what these gaps is where that fog, that cooling air basically streams in and then fills out into the valley. Well, what makes the Petaluma Gap extremely, extremely unique and different is that it essentially receives air and fog and the cooling influences from two gaps. It receives it from the Golden Gate Bridge as well as the Petaluma Gap. And so, at times, you can go out there and it feels like you are out on the coast. So that's kind of, I think, where the reasoning behind the Sonoma Coast sort of stretching out that far comes from. But there are definitely different. There's some really hot areas of the Sonoma Coast, and there's some very cool areas of the Sonoma Coast. So that Syrah Vineyard we just felt was really kind of fit what we were trying to do as far as making a wine. I think vineyard selection to me as a winemaker is the most important. And you can attest to this working with me last year. I definitely take a very minimalist approach to my wines. I kind of say, and I think a lot of people like to say, but I try and actually do it is my job as a winemaker is not to screw up the process. If you can find a vineyard that has good fruit, a good people taking care of it, a good family behind it, you can basically as a winemaker not do much, and sort of your job is just to massage it through the process. Now, clearly there are times like last harvest where Mother Nature just gives you bad eggs and bad grapes, and you just need to know what to do to kind of continue to massage it through.
Knead it out, if you will.
Exactly. So so this particular vineyard is owned by the San Giacomo family. They're a long time Italian family in the sort of the Carnero, Sonoma, Napa region, and this is one of their only. It's their only Syrah vineyard. So that's where we source our fruit from. That it's called the San Giacomo Old Lakeville Road Syrah, and 2008 was our first vintage from that, and we continue to produce a small amount of Syrah from there. So it's pretty. I think it's an amazing site. I just love the. It's at a pretty steep angle. It's got sort of the southwestern exposure, and it just, to me, it really kind of embodies what's taking place in sort of the Rhone Valley.
It's a beautiful site out there. I liked going out there a couple times with you to check on things. some really nice views. But yeah, the one thing that I certainly remember is it's just massive. Like I'm like, where are we at? And the coast is where? And what?
You wouldn't be the first.
Yeah. I've heard, sort of since learned that, there's sort of grumblings about this is the real Sonoma Coast and this and that. And, I think probably the most important thing is that, making some good wine from there. So you said you're going to make a white blend this year. My interest is piqued. I'm a big fan of white blends,
I am. I've had a little history, as you alluded to earlier, about a budding family. I've got a young daughter will be 3 in December, named Isa, and she was born in 2009. And then my wife and I recently had another daughter named Alina, who was born in April of this year. And I made the mistake, or the made an issue of making Isa a wine when she was born in 2009. We made a dessert wine called Chupi. It's a late harvest Chardonnay.
And Chupi, you have to explain.
Chupi is slang for pacifier in Spanish, and it also happens to be her nickname. Mm-hmm. Because ever since she was born, even when she was, we went in to do the sonograms, you'd get your pictures, and there she was sucking on her thumb. And so from birth till 2 years old, she had a pacifier in her mouth. So it was only fitting to name it after her, call it Chupi. Our idea was the sweetness of the wine kind of melded together with the sweetness of birth. Mm-hmm. So when you make a wine after one kid and you happen to have another kid, you need to come up with something.
It's on, dude.
It's on. And unfortunately, we don't. Alina doesn't have a nickname, so we couldn't be creative and try and come up with something.
I think that's a good name for a wine. So it's going to be Alina?
We're going to call it Alina.
Yeah, that's a good name for a wine. Yeah.
I figured, we don't do a white wine, and so why not jump into the white wine bandwagon?
So are you going to make that a Pinot?
I will making that a Pinot.
So how are you going to cool it? What are you going to use for? Are you doing barrel ferments?
I'm going to do tank ferment. If you remember those little portable tanks, and I'll just, keep it inside the winery where it stays. This is the cellar.
Yeah.
And I'll just keep it in there, and then I will, I'll have to barrel age it for a little while. I won't be able to keep it in stainless steel the whole time. But and then if Rhone wines are what I love and what I want to do, and so figured Paso Robles is a budding sort of Rhone region, mm-hmm. and through some connections, our intern at Pina this year worked in Paso Robles, as well as her roommate was an assistant winemaker at a few places down there. So through them, I was able to make some connections for some Roussanne and some Viognier, and spent basically Saturday morning, got up at 4:30 in the morning, drove the 4 hours down to Paso Robles, met with a few growers, and found our site, and then hopped back in the car and came back later that day. So it was a real quick round trip, but it's something that I'm excited about, and
cool. It's a great
something
little journey
that
to take. I have not worked with Roussanne, but Viognier, I've worked with a little bit, decent amount, and I find it a really interesting varietal, particularly in New Zealand, where it's already a very sort of pungent aromatic. And
right.
With the young soils in New Zealand, it's a crazy wine. I think biggest issue being getting people to pronounce it.
Vulgande.
Yeah. In Virginia, actually, which is the podcast I just posted like a week ago with a Virginia winemaker there. It's become the white wine of Virginia.
Oh, really?
Along with Cab Franc being the red. And
wow.
It's definitely a little bit distinctive and different from that region as well. I find it really strong and sort of can be oily and things like that out of New Zealand. You have to watch if you are going to blend it, what you're going to do with it, because it could definitely dominate the blend. But
right.
I'd be really interested to see, how this project comes out for you.
Yeah,
I'll be drinking it.
It's going to be, both varietals are new to me as well, and that's one of the great things that I've found, that everybody tends to, when you do tell them that winemakers collaborate and talk and share ideas, most people are really sort of taken back by that and don't kind of
they think it's like really
quite understand it,
or
right?
something like that, and it's like I got secrets over here.
Yeah,
or
exactly. And
very little of that.
It's not like that at all. I think that everybody recognizes winemaking as kind of an art form, and everybody has different experiences with different things.
There is one winery in Hawke's Bay that does that, and we all think they're the big dicks here, the old timers, and we're just like, fuck that.
The old crotchety,
crotchety
guys.
And I, there's been a couple other instances of them saying things, that they think is of some tradition that I'm just like, a bunch of blowhards,
It's like the Coke recipe or the Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe.
They were downing Malbec at one point, and I was like, come on, guys. Like, seriously. Nobody takes you that serious,
It's just wine.
Granted, they do sell out of their wine, like, all the time, so, and it's expensive, but whatever.
I see where you're going.
There's not a, I've talked to, like, barrel sellers and people like that who are just like, man, they're really secretive over there. And it's like, what's the point? But I'm interested to taste that wine and see how it goes.
Yeah, it'll be the first grapes that we bring into Pina this year. Probably going to be picking.
And I think it's a great idea to have a name for it,
right?
Because they won't have to say Roussanne Viognier,
right?
Which unfortunately can be intimidating to people. But,
exactly. Throw that on a label, and it's like, huh?
Yeah.
But that was going to lead me to another point about these little projects. As far as our production for Campesino is pretty tiny. I think for the first 08, 09, 010, we were strictly at about 150 cases. 2011, we brought in a bit more Pinot. And brought in some Grenache and some Mourvedre, some newer varietals. So our production jumped up to about 225 cases. And this year we'll be doing another 75 cases of white. So our production will be about 300 cases. And that's not enough to make a living off of by any stretch of the imagination. But what it really does allow us to do is to really be experimental. And it allows us to do different varietals. Most people come to Napa thinking Cabernet and Chardonnay. Not very many people come, expecting to find a winery that's going to be producing a Roussanne and Viognier from Paso Robles. But what's neat about staying small is that you're able to find your own niche. You're able to find your own market.
Totally.
And you can find enough people who get behind your label or get behind that particular varietal. And I always want that. I always want to, have something small on the side, because that really to me is my creative outlet. It allows me to, to try things and do things, that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do at a place like Pina or another winery, for example, because they've got they're established, they've had they've got a loyal brand of customers that are behind them, and I will always hey, they're paying my bills, they're paying they're keeping the lights on at home and food on the table, so I will always say this is what you want me to make, okay, I'll make it. But with my own label, I really want to, just be able to experiment, try new things, collaborate with other people on different techniques and ways they're doing things. Because if I didn't, then I'd probably go insane.
Yeah, you'd definitely need the outlet, the little experiments and things. Are you thinking about putting any Viognier in that Syrah, or freezing some skins or anything like that? Or
I've always been tempted to do that, and I think that if I was having issues with my Syrah, or if I wasn't happy with how it's been coming out, then I probably would maybe.
Sure.
But I think that I'm able to, with that particular site, really coax out some pretty nice aromatics, and that most people would tend to use Viognier for, is to sort of lift it up, give it some more floral characteristics.
Yeah, no, the ones that I've had from New Zealand, I haven't liked, actually, or at least maybe they've gone overboard. It may have to do with the fact that what I was saying before, that the Viognier is so bright and aromatic, even more so from the soils in New Zealand, that when they do try to blend it or co-ferment, it becomes a little more prominent than I prefer.
Right.
You know, some people are having some success with it on the market, but it's not something I prefer, particularly because I just love the Syrah style anyway out of the Giblet Gravels and parts of Hawke's Bay. So that, you know, it might not be as much of an issue in California, but the guy I'm working for this year is doing some Grenache Blanc, and he froze the skins to add into, it's for his own label, to add in, which I'm interested in because I think from what I can tell already just from the juice, it's a little more of a subtle white than Viognier.
Right.
But I do like the ideas of what it can do for a Syrah with color stabilization and lifted nose.
Right.
And
that's the first I've heard of anybody using Grenache Blanc.
Yeah, I think there's somebody in... Anyway, the ones that I've had in France... Or French wines that I've had, and I haven't noticed it or don't know, and they're probably just doing it without me knowing it. So it's probably just has a long tradition of this vineyard we always use and add in a little bit of that into the Syrah or something like that. But it's certainly, you know, on the sort of technical, experimental side of winemaking, something that is interesting. And, you know, once again, it goes back to a little bit of an art to it and saying, oh, that's kind of a cool thing they're doing.
Yeah, and I think you also, you have to, as a winemaker, you have to be open, to you know, new ideas and new things. You know, I had always, for 3 years with my Pinot, was very straightforward with it, and then working with you last year and some of the experiences you had with tossing stems back into doing some stem inclusion, and I wasn't, up until last year, wasn't willing or able to do that or wanted to do that, and you suggested it, and
I think it is. It's a sort of, comfortability and able to take some more chances, confidence. I know, for the most part, I'm still a nervous wreck with my wines, but I'm starting to feel a little more, and that's probably exactly what you were going through last year. You're like, oh, let's try this a little. Yeah, it's going to be fine. It's going to be all right. You get a little more of that in you.
Well, and that's the thing is, you say you want to experiment, you want to try new things, but in the end, it's this is my wife and mine. This is our savings.
Yeah.
We put our money into this. We have no, we don't have anybody helping us out, and so, and even if we did have people helping us out, it's still, it's their money.
It's even more pressure.
It's even more pressure. Which it is definitely more pressure because you have to answer to them, and if we screw up on something, we're gonna have some bad wine to drink. We don't have we can just look at each other and say, well, all right.
Yeah.
But so it's a double-edged sword, because on one end you want to be able to push the limit, you want to be able to try new things and experiment and see new things, but at the same time, it's the experiments can go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And, when you're only producing 100 cases of a wine and half of it you experiment with and try something new on, and luckily it turned out the right way, but if it turns out the wrong way, that's 50 cases that you're not going to be able to sell, or you're going to have to try and do something different with. And so it's a balancing act. And, but I think it's one of those things that, if you work with people or get to know people who are familiar with it, and they can kind of, it wasn't as if, you just threw out the idea. We're on the sorting table and you're like, oh, let's just try this. I've never heard of it. And let's see what it does. I respected your wines, your palate, who you were, and what you've worked with in the past. To sort of understand that, and this year. So with that being said, this year I'm gonna take even a little bit more of a step further. And
I think you'll have a better year for it too.
Yeah,
that was
definitely.
The other thing. It was a little bit riskier last year, with it being a cooler year for Napa. Though Pinot, I think we were pretty happy with the fruit coming.
Yeah.
But it was certainly a little bit riskier last year, where I'm feeling like this year is like we're just going to pick it when it's ready.
When it's ready, as opposed to some of the there was a lot of mercy picks.
Yeah.
Where it was the grower calling you up and saying, I know you were scheduled to pick Latin on Friday, but I'm out here with so and so, and the skins are falling off, so you might want to pick now. And or it's full of mold and rot. You need to do something. And this year it's definitely I think shaping up to be a great year, a great vintage. The weather-wise, it's been a little bit warmer, not very much. I think we're still trending maybe a week or so before earlier than last year. But what I've really been able to see in the vineyards that I've walked is, the flavors are definitely very, very pronounced and very, very there, and the alcohols are going to be a bit lower, which is going to be nice.
Oh, really? Well, I guess, yeah, because you're not waiting for flavors to
Right.
catch up to sugar like we were. That was a big thing for me last year, was sort of adjusting to that, to saying, well, this is tasting the wines or tasting the fruit in the vineyard and going to sample and saying, this is a 26, 27 bricks. And we're like, we're not going to pick it yet.
We're not there yet.
And that was a new understanding.
Yeah,
for
California
me.
is definitely.
And on the flip side, I've had friends from California come down to do harvest in Hawke's Bay, and they go, you guys are picking Cabernet at 23? Like, what are you, crazy? And then we make the wine and they taste it and they go, oh yeah, it's pretty good. So it's definitely a terroir thing and something that's changed or something that's different. But sort of getting back to what you said overall with these taking chances and slowly developing your brand and things, I think those ideas go back to the sort of train of thought that you're in it for the long haul, and it's every year you learn a little something different, and then you move on to the next year and the next year. And when you have a commitment to say, hey, we're gonna, I'm gonna do this forever, and you have a real love for it, you can kind of roll with the punches a lot easier when.
Right.
When you say, I didn't just go out and try this and I'm doing this career and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. When you have, the idea that you're going to be doing it, it sounds like you had that sort of epiphany that I had at some point in my career, where it's almost like a weight off your shoulders. You're like, oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to do this forever.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I remember, talking with somebody the other day, maybe last year, about, we don't want to talk about, we are getting, not that 35, 36, 37 is old, but we're not 24, we're not 25 anymore, and as you get older, responsibilities start coming forward and things start happening, and so the topic or the idea of retirement sort of started coming up, and I just kind of sat there and I was like, well, I don't think I ever really want to retire.
Yeah.
I'm in a profession, I'm in a thing, I'm in a thing that just I want to continue to do, forever. And sure, I don't want to. I'm not going to be 75 and breaking out tanks and doing pump overs and walking the vineyards and doing all those sort of things. But I definitely still want to continue to make wine and continue to do things, and I think that again draws back to just the winemaking community, and being a winemaker is something that is not for everybody. Everybody kind of has this romanticized idea of what winemaking is, and oh yeah, you must have. It's like, no, it's not. I'm basically for starting probably next week when we start bringing in fruit. I'm gonna know my cellar worker, my harvest intern a lot better than I know my wife and my kids and my family, because for the next 3 to 4 months it's
you got a harvest widow.
Exactly. Exactly. But no, and I think I saw that from my dad, in the sense that he was an artist and still is an artist, and he's well into his mid 70s and he's still working at UC Davis, and just he loves what he does, and he doesn't have 3 classes like he did when he was in his 50s or 60s. Now he's got 1 class, but it's just still that love and that that passion that you find for something. And I'm very fortunate that I found mine at least a somewhat younger age, but I still even think that I got into it too late. I look at you, I look at Sierra this year, I look at my past interns, I look at Richard, I look at Rachel, who both came from New Zealand. And there's a hint of jealousy. There's a hint of longing to be them, because it's, hey, you're doing 1 year, you're doing a harvest in, Australia. The next year you're doing a harvest in South America. Then you get to come up and do a harvest in Italy or up in California. And so it's all those experiences that are definitely, and again, I think that's what going back to tying it back to the experimental phase, that was why I had faith in you, and what you were saying was because you've been different places, you've seen different things, you have those experiences that I don't. I've been making cab, and there's not very much experimenting that you can really do in cab.
Well, Napa cab,
exactly. That's true.
Well, part of it is too. When I went to school back for wine and vit. There were some kids right out of high school that were, and out of the 12 or so that had started off with that degree, I think 2 or 3 finished. And part of it was you're weeding out, and it's a normal sort of school thing, and whether I want to do this or not. But also, I just remember looking at some of these guys and being like, you have no life experience to draw on whether you'd want to do this or not. And I talked to Chris on the podcast. He's my first episode because I think he's a special case of somebody who started working in the vineyard when he was 15. By the time he was 18, he knew this is what he wanted, and he just came through Napa last week and has a really kind of interesting outlook on what he's seeing here, very positive, and he's excited to be working in the U.S. and seeing, the New Zealand wine industry, I think, is going through some flux right now, and he was sort of happy to see, this is a very positive attitude here, and he's interested in it. But he's the real exception to most people that, you're going to come at it, and just like I did, I came at it when I was 30, 31 or whatever, with some life experience and just as importantly, some wine drinking experience. I think that's a big part of it. And whether it started in Franzia, mine started with, drinking, old Italian table wine or something. I
thought you were going to drop a Boone's Farm on
No, I'm sure there was some of that in there too, but, the Mad Dog or something. I think that's wine based. So, but there is some wine drinking experience in there, some life experience too. It's a very much, I think, the exception to, if anything, I've seen kids who, they went to Davis or some other school when they were sort of 18, 19, 20, or maybe they went and did their grad degree. They went and did a few harvests, and now they're doing something else completely different because it just wasn't for them. Whereas I think you can come at it. There's many paths to getting here, and I think that's what we're talking about here in this podcast, and maybe that's a good place to wrap it up.
It is.
See how quick 47 minutes can go?
It goes pretty fast, especially when you have some nice wine.
Yeah, that's right. Toot your horn there. We might as well keep that trend going up because I did want to mention, if you want to check out Macario and Griselda's websites, campesinoscellars.com, and they are on Facebook too, which I will link up on the website for the podcast, which simply facebook.com/campesinoscellars. If you look me up on Facebook, you'll see I am a liker of I like it. But yeah, I think the website's pretty cool. Has some gives you a really good idea. The one thing I like about your website is it has a sort of feel for the brand as opposed to just set information. Something I need to work on a little more. I think I'm still finding my way with it, but right now it's decibel is sort of shouting out from the other side of the world. It's sort of interesting being down there. So as always, yes, Decibel Wine's a big, the official sponsor of the Wine is Food podcast.
The official wine.
Yes. But yeah, man, thanks for coming and doing this. And I hope we can talk again next year or maybe in a few months or whatever. I really want this to eventually become something that I can post every week. I tried to log up a few episodes while I was traveling around in July, but I think the most important thing is to get these is to be patient with trying to meet up with winemakers, especially coming into this time of year.
Yeah, no, and love to do even a end of harvest recap and just kind of touched on some of the wines that we'll be making this coming year and touch on the white the Alina that we'll be making, and
let's do it. I'm sure I'll have a few stories from this production facility that
we always
that's
the great thing is we always have stories and different things that we'll
I think this is going to develop into not only how'd you get into the wine industry, what your story is, which has definitely been the trend for these first, I think will end up being 20-25 episodes. into what's going on right now, what just happened, tell some funny stories. You know, there's going to be new people all the time that I'm going to want to tell their story a little bit, but I'm hoping for returning people like yourself and Chris and Jenny and people like that I know I'm going to be working with and talking to over the years to come, that we get to talk about some other things as well. So
we could do a whole episode on Claire.
We certainly could. There's definitely a character there that
if you're ever up in Napa, come by Pina Cellars and on a Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, and you'll understand the man, the myth, the legend that is Claire.
Yeah, I've definitely had some people who visited and they were like, "What's up with that dude? He's crazy." He's certainly a character, and yeah. So if anybody has any questions, obviously you can always email me, wineisfood@gmail.com, and I can pass on stuff to Macario, and we can try to catch up maybe next time or with some of those questions, and we'll go from there.
On the flip side.
On the flip side, as they say. Yes, sorry, I don't have all my American lingo down anymore.
Don't forget you are American.
I know. I feel it when I come home. Speaking of which, we're going to go watch a bit of the Giants game and go Phils. And, and Macario, thanks, man. Cheers.